There's nobody more important to Washington's 2027 class than Jon Ioane.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Just click monitor all your videos out there. Wherever you're getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, please make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the show out a lot. Now, I got a really fun show coming at all you everydayers on this Tuesday. I want to take a break from the transfer portal for 24 hours and let you all take a breath. I need one too. So I can't wait to talk about On3 slotting Washington in as the number 18 team in the country in their way too early 2026 rankings. I think this is really exciting in terms of expectations and all that, but we'll get there later on because Jedd Fisch needs to keep building his program through the high school ranks. So I'm going to throw some new names at you that I don't think we've mentioned before on this show in a little bit, but I want to start with Washington's top targets because the guy who is, in my opinion, the most important piece, if you will, of this 2027 class is 4-star defensive tackle Jon Ioane, and he was on campus over the weekend for an unofficial visit. Keep in mind that it is a contact period right now, so we have seen some coaches on the road. Talk about that in a little bit too, but Jon Ioane being on campus is such a big deal because this is a guy who, you look at the intangibles down at Tustin High School in Southern California, listed at 6'3", 295 pounds. You watch his film and, oh man, he is so much fun to watch. This is a kid who has played on both sides of the line, where he plays defensive tackle, has played some offensive line, has even played some quarterback at Tustin High School. And I think he's just so much fun to watch when you look at the strength, the power, the first step that he has, the ability to get off the line of scrimmage, the football intelligence that comes along with having to play the quarterback position and even in the Wildcat for some periods of time. And I'm so intrigued by what this kid brings to the table. And we all know what needs to happen along the defensive line in the class of 2027. We've talked about it a lot. And adding Jon Ioane alongside guys like Tevita Nonu, like Troy Bowens, like potentially a Cassie Curry from Sierra Canyon, who Washington is certainly very, very interested in. Adding somebody like Jon Ioane as potentially the centerpiece because of who he is as an athlete and what he can bring to the table is absolutely critical. And this is also a battle where I don't believe that this is one that Jason Kafusi can really afford to lose, because you look at the interest that Jason Kafusi in particular has shown in Jon Ioane. That goes back to his time in 8th grade when at Arizona, the Wildcats were the first team to offer him a scholarship that year in 2023. Jason Kafusi obviously being the one who did that. And then Washington became the second team to offer him a scholarship in 2024 when Jason Kafusi got here. So this is someone that he has certainly been after for a very, very long time. And obviously he's picked up a lot of interest since then. And rightfully so. He is that talented and he is that kind of prospect. But when you look at what Washington needs along the defensive line right now, especially at defensive tackle, this is a guy who perfectly fits what you're looking for. And like I said, I know he can't do it alone, but I want to talk about his skill set in particular right now because he is someone who, you look at what T.I. Mukais is expected to bring to the table in 2026. I feel like Jon Ioane is someone who can give you something similar with that athletic profile that I was just talking about as a true freshman, where you don't need him to do a lot. You certainly don't want him to have to do a whole lot because you don't want to have to throw so much in terms of just picking up the defense and doing all these different things along with adjusting to the physicality of the Big Ten at a true freshman. And if he's ready for it, that's great. Of course, you're happy with that, right? We talk about that a lot, but you can't expect one or two players to completely overhaul and change a defensive line. And it's one thing that's interesting about Washington's transfer portal strategy as well. When you look at the guys they brought in along the interior, Deshaun Watts, Darren Conley, Kai McClendon, all along the interior, all of those guys have multiple years of eligibility remaining. So if you're able to pair that with T.I., who hopefully is able to give you a lot as a true freshman this season, maybe Omar Khan takes that step forward, and Linneus Davis is someone who continues to just break out and really live up to his potential. All of those guys combined, that's great. That's what you're looking for, but you still need more from that position. And you hope to see that come through the transfer portal, like we've been talking about on this show over the last couple of weeks, and we'll see how that plays out. But getting a guy like Jon Ioane in the program is absolutely critical to what Jedd Fisch and Ryan Walters and Jason Kafusi need to be building along the defensive line to be able to compete for the college football playoff and everything like that. So seeing not only Jason Kafusi and that defensive staff want to go down there to talk to him whenever they can, but the fact that he's able to come up here for a visit is a really good sign, in my opinion, as to where Washington stands in his recruitment. Obviously, there's a very long time until signing day, but getting in the mix this early and hopefully finding a way to seal the deal, get an official visit set up, maybe even have him committed by the time that comes around, is exactly what this coaching staff needs to do to continue to build up a defensive line that can hold up against the best teams in the Big Ten. Now, a couple other guys I want to talk about before we move on here. One of them is another guy who did receive an in-home visit from Washington very recently, and that's four-star offensive lineman Gecova Doyal. This is a guy who at 6'3", 280 pounds is what he's listed at. I really like what he brings to the table. He is so intriguing to me, where he plays down at Puyallup High School. So certainly not a challenge for Michael Switzer to go down there and speak with him. But when I look at how he fits in this system, I'm so intrigued with the depth that he can give you along the interior of the offensive line, because of the strength he plays with. The leverage that he gets is so impressive for a kid that just finished up his junior season in high school. He absolutely understands how to get low, how to play with pad leverage, and different things like that are really, really important for anybody, obviously, when it comes to playing along the line of scrimmage, but especially somebody being that young and having that advance of a knowledge of those different parts of the game is really exciting. And when you look at what he could be in the system behind John Mills, behind Champ Tilialia, potentially taking over as a starter one day, getting that kid committed and continuing this in-state wave that you've been able to get with Braylon Pope, already in the boat, with Maurice Williams, who picked up an offer from Penn State, already in the boat as well. All of that bodes really, really well for where you're going, and it just continues to help you with other guys that you're going after in-state, whether it be Tevita Nonu, whether it be quarterback Sione Kaho, whether it be tight end Zach Albright, who also got a visit from Jordan Pow last week. It's very clear that Washington has done a very good job of prioritizing the top prospects in state and looking at just what this program can be with a lot of those guys, and then building with a Jon Ioane from California, building with some of these other guys from all over the West Coast, whether it be some of these offensive linemen that they might be interested in from down in Arizona, a guy like Josiah Molden from Oregon, and then continuing to span further east, where with some of these guys maybe from Colorado, as you continue to try to span into Texas and further into the Midwest. If you are still able to build the core of your class from the best local players and the best players on the West Coast, that has always been a recipe for success for Washington. And it's a really exciting thought. And one more guy who, in that same vein, because we were just talking about him, is four-star quarterback Sione Kaho, who Washington has absolutely been making a big push for to try to get him in the boat relatively soon. And after watching him in the Polynesian Bowl, it's very clear why. This is a kid who, even as a junior, stood out against some of the top competition around just the world of high school and college football, with a lot of those guys being 2026 signees that he was going up against, and the arm talent he shows, the ability that he has to layer throws to all three levels of the field, combined with that athleticism, is one of the things that makes him Washington's top quarterback target on the board, which is something we have talked about a lot on this show over the last couple of months. And it's why I believe that he's going to be the first high school commit that Washington earns in the calendar year of 2026, because we have not seen that just yet. And a guy like that really helping just kickstart this class, where, again, you do have a couple of local commits already, getting your quarterback in the boat, not having to worry about that anymore, and then being able to build from there and focus on the trenches and focus on where you really need to pay attention to in this class is so important. So with that being said, let's switch from some of the guys we know to some of the ones that I really think you should know about. Right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. There's nothing like college football season, tailgates, packed stadiums, and being right there in the middle of it all. The energy, the bands, the moments you remember forever. But actually getting tickets, that part used to be frustrating with long queues, logins, and prices jumping at checkout. That's why Game Time gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to unlock amazing college football tickets and experiences in just a few taps. The app is incredibly easy to use. I went from browsing to buying tickets in just minutes. I love being able to see the view from my seat before buying, so I knew exactly what I was getting. And the zone deal stood out. You pick the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save even more. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. We've also got a message from our good friends over at the Space Needle. After 4 p.m., the Space Needle's Pint and a Pie gives you the whole package. Entry, a savory or sweet tip-top pie, and a pint of beer, wine, or a non-alcoholic drink, all for just $35 per person. Minimum purchase of 2 required. The Space Needle is Seattle's most iconic destination, not just for the views, but for evening fun. Rather than trying to cram into a crowded sports bar right before, why not enjoy a little space and a great view while pre-gaming with your favorite cocktail? Whether it's date night, friend night, or you're just here for the deal of it all, come take your place on the horizon. Only $35 a person, limited time offer, 21 plus only, ID required. Get tickets at spaceneedle.com, minimum 2 required. As we move right along here on today's show, thank you for making Locked On Huskies your first watch or first listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, go check out our new Everydayer Club. It's really cool. You get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Huskies, and that's compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. And you also get an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of this show. I'll be hanging out there, answering questions, doing everything that I can to help make the experience better for you. Go to lockedonhuskies.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. And as we continue on today's show, I'm really excited to talk about some of these new-ish names. I don't think I've mentioned any of these guys on the show before. So with that being said, I want to start with 4-star wide receiver Zion White. And this is a guy who I honestly didn't have on my radar for a pretty long time. And this is a guy where he moved from Hawaii to IMG Academy in Florida, and he's really blown up as of late. 6'3", 170 pounds, ranked in the top 175 by 247 Sports. And he told Rivals recently that Tennessee, Oregon, and Washington are the 3 programs that are really standing out for him right now. And when you turn on the film, it's clear why Jedd Fisch and Kevin Cummings are really interested in. Again, 6'3", 170 pounds, a bigger guy, which in a class where you're probably only going to take 3 wide receivers, I really do believe that 2 of those 3 guys are going to fill the role that Braylon Pope does at 6'4", 170, whatever he's listed at right now. That can be that field stretching guy from the outside who can go up and win in contested catch scenarios. The typical X receiver, if you will, as we've had many discussions about what that looks like in this offense over the past couple of weeks. And I don't think that he's got necessarily elite long speed, but he's another guy with big long strides who absolutely can eat up ground, eat up cushion against opposing defensive backs, and just find ways to get open against both man and zone. He's not necessarily the quickest getting in and out of his breaks, but those are all things that are coachable, and they come with time as you learn how to sink into your hips and just drive and make those quicker cuts. And this is all in 247 Sports' evaluation of him as well, where I look at all of those things and I think, okay, yeah, those are all absolutely very coachable things that Washington is looking at. And seeing the way he really stood out at the Polynesian Bowl this past week is another reason I think Washington might have been really interested in him, because when you get an opportunity to go up against that elite competition, like we were just talking about with Sione Kaho, and you really do stand out in that regard, I think that's very, very important. And it goes back to something that Matt Doherty said on this show last month, as I'm sure you everydayers remember, where we were talking about Cody Green and his decision to leave Eastside Catholic here in Washington and go down to Mater Dei in California, where he thrived in the Trinity League and became the #1 player in California by the time that he signed with Washington. I'm sure that part of that played into Zion White's decision to go to IMG in Florida as well. And when you get a chance to play against some of the best competition in the country, and I'm sure that, seeing that on a more local stage for Washington, not having to, do more scouting of IMG games. It's not like they're not already watching several guys over there anyway, but I feel like just seeing that in some of these different settings against some other just true high-end competition is something that might have really helped spurn their interest in what Zion White brings to the table. And as I look at what receiver is going to look like, it feels like Zarek Sidney is from Arizona is another guy who is standing out to Washington as one of these top targets who can play that versatile role where he can play some Z, play some in the slot as a really just solid route runner who can be relied on over the middle of the field. But as I look at this other outside spot, I'm really curious if Zion White is going to be the guy they prioritize. If it's going to be somebody like Damani Warren from Nevada, who is certainly on this coaching staff's radar and has been for a while, or if it's going to be a guy who we saw on campus over the course of the fall, and he took an unofficial visit for the Illinois game in 4-star Trey Moore from Texas. And going into last season, I would have looked at a guy like Trey Moore and said, I don't know. It feels like this isn't typically a guy that Washington can go out there and grab. And then they flipped Jordan Clay just before signing day. So I just want to throw all those other names out there just as a keep in mind, because when you go out and you add 4 wide receivers in the high school class in 2026, 5 in 2025, yes, a couple of those guys have transferred already due to attrition and different things like that. It's just something to kick around. It's something to keep in mind because there are just a lot of moving parts when it comes to recruiting at any given moment. And I think tight end is a great example of that, where Jordan Paopao has taken 2 players in every cycle, and there's going to be some attrition there at some point. We'll see what that might wind up looking like, but it seemed like he had some top targets. Anthony Cartwright from Michigan, Zach Ferris from Nevada, Zach Albright from Glacier Peak here in Washington. Seemed like the 3 guys that were really, really standing out to him. And then he goes to New Jersey and he offers a couple of guys. And one of the guys that he offered, and it stood out to me, not just because I'm sure all you everydayers out there would love stealing a recruit from Kalen DeBoer, but it's because this kid is just a really, really fun watch. And it's 4-star tight end Colt Lumpris from New Jersey, 6'6", 225 pounds, committed to Alabama in early December. And he's got some other big time offers, Ohio State, Michigan being the 2 that really stand out in that regard. I know Florida's in there as well, a couple other Big Ten and SEC programs. But when I look at Colt Lumpris, this is a guy who really reminded me of Vanderploeg in a lot of ways. And I say that because he's a really nice athlete. He's very smooth at getting in and out of breaks for somebody of that size. And he's somebody who doesn't necessarily play a lot of inline tight end. And I say that because Vanderploeg, when he was coming out of high school, when he was committed to Washington before flipping to Oregon and signing with them, and now is back in the transfer portal, it was a guy who at that size, a very similar size, 6'6", would just be isolated a lot in the slot or out wide because he's just such a matchup problem. And you see all those same things on Colt Lumpris's films. And one of the things that he does really, really well, even being listed as a tight end and being that big, is he separates so well through his route running, through his physicality, through so many different means. And it's why Kalen DeBoer and Alabama picked up on him so early and were able to secure a commitment from him, because he does all those things really well. And like we were talking about with Zion White, Washington is, scouring the country at any given point, but it's not always, I don't think that scouting tight ends in New Jersey has been the number one priority for this staff. Whereas it was the same thing when I think back to Ramzak Fruin, who blew up this past week at the Polynesian Bowl, where Matt Doherty said on this show that there were personnel guys from all over the country texting him, how did you get this guy? It's a similar thing in terms of talent evaluation. I just wanted to throw that out there. But this guy is somebody who, again, if Washington is able to gain a foothold in his recruitment, I'm very curious to see how this tight end position is going to play out. Because I look at a guy like Zach Ferris or Anthony Cartwright, as both of them can certainly fill that role as well. I think Zach Albright does too. But when I look at how how Washington has recruited tight end over the last couple of years, it has come down to wanting a guy who can play in line and having a move H-back kind of guy, much in the mold of what I think Colt Lumpris can be, where, yeah, you can ask him to put on 25, 30 pounds and ask him to play in line, but I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the plan wherever he winds up, not necessarily just at Washington. So again, just another thing to kick around there. And one more guy who I wanted to throw at you is a recent Stanford decommit in 3-star offensive lineman Ben Lowther from Arizona, 6'7", 320 pounds. This is a kid that Washington has made a priority of for a very long time. They offered him back in May of last year and really did make a big push for him back during the 25 season where he came up and he visited twice. I believe it was for the season opener. And then I know he was on campus for the Ohio State game at the end of September as well. And all of that was before he ended up making a pledge to Stanford and backing off. And this is a guy who, over the course of the next few months, I think is going to really rise up the recruiting rankings and get some more interest because of his big, long frame. He's a really smooth mover when you watch his film and is just one of those guys in that true tackle kind of prototype that the more you watch him, the more it's, okay, yeah, I certainly see why this guy is gaining all this interest outside of just having, again, a 6'7" and 320-pound frame. So when I look at a player like that, I think that there are more offers that are going to come where he does have several solid Power 4 offers. I know Kansas State's in the mix. I believe Iowa State is as well. And I think more of those are going to come by the time May or June roll around. And so as I continue to watch what Washington wants to do on the offensive line, that's why I mentioned Gecova Doyal earlier. I think that two guys like that would be really solid building blocks. And then whoever you think some of these other top targets might be, Reese Russell in Colorado being a true center kind of target is one who will always be on the top of my mind. There are so many different ways that this offensive line class could shake out because Washington has identified, I want to say like 8 or 9 priority targets when you go through just the offer list and whatever else and just kind of see, oh, okay, yeah, this guy's been on campus once or twice. Reese Russell's been on campus 3 or 4 times. They're obviously making him a top priority here. And the more that you look at just kind of where it's going, you could see Washington arguably adding 4, maybe even 5 guys in this class, depending on how a couple of things might go on the recruiting trail. So again, just a couple of things to keep in mind because we're always going to be talking recruiting here on Locked On Huskies, but let's switch gears here a little bit because Washington being in the top 25 of On3's way too early rankings for 2026 is really exciting. Yes. Right off the bat, yes. On3's, or not even just On3's, way too early rankings for a season that is 8-9 months away are a little silly. That's why I wanted to talk about this at the very end, because I know it's not the most important thing in the world, but I like seeing this because it shows that the expectations around what Washington needs to do in 2026 are growing. The Huskies have a lot of questions to answer coming into even spring practice, where there are a lot of guys. It's really nice knowing that 20 of the 25 signees are going to be on campus for spring practice. And obviously you don't want to throw everything right away at a whole bunch of true freshmen when it comes to, the first game of the season and who's going to play, who's going to be in the rotation, everything like that. But knowing that Washington is getting a massive talent infusion for the upcoming season is still a really exciting thought. But that's still not enough, because Jedd Fisch and this coaching staff need to find ways to put together better performances for big games, whether it be the Ohio State game where you score 6 points, when you score 7 points at Michigan, 10 at Wisconsin, and then 14 against Oregon. Those were your 3 or 4 biggest games of the year. Obviously, the Wisconsin one didn't feel that way going in, but still going on the road into that environment, knowing what that defense and that front seven was like, you knew that was going to be an extremely important game. And the fact that all 4 of those challenges, you didn't just lose, but you failed. You truly failed in all 4 of those. Those are all things that, yes, are going to get better with experience. And we don't even need to talk about the way the schedule shapes up this year, because a lot of this comes down to what Washington is expecting internally to be able to do. And you hear Jedd Fisch talk about this every time he gets up at the podium. And I think it is very important, without even addressing the DeMond Williams situation right now. This is a group that should have a really talented offensive line on that side of the ball. Who's going to emerge as some of these other top pass catchers? That's a good question. Those are things that we need to answer. But you look at how this offensive line is going to be able to protect DeMond and clear holes for this running game, bringing back John Mills, with Landon Hatchett returning at center, Drew Party getting another year at right tackle. All of that in and of itself is really important. And then you look at whoever does start at left tackle, whether it's Cole Dietrich or whether it's Cody Green. That's a really nice combination. And then the experience that you get from having a Garrett Hatchett there, whether he is the starter or whether he gets beat out by redshirt freshman Champ Talialia, that is a really, really strong group and exactly what you'd hope for going into the Big Ten. And yeah, it took a couple years for you to get there, but when Jedd Fisch took this program over, it was torn down to the studs, and that was going to take some time to rebuild. So you do need to see that step forward this year. And I think obviously with Jedd being an offensive-minded guy who is still calling the plays, those are always going to be the first things on people's minds. And again, this is all, excluding the Demond Williams situation for right now. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes here, because you look at the defensive side of the ball, and after Ryan Walters did get his extension and gets his raise to now making around $2 million a year, that's all great. That's all exactly what you're looking for, because if you can figure out this defensive line and you can figure out this pass rush, which I do believe that he can do because he is one of the best defensive coordinators in the country, and that's why he's being compensated as such, I think that this defense has an opportunity to grow even further from being top 15 in the nation in run defense, top 20 in points allowed, top 25 in total yards allowed. All of that is critical because you look at this linebacker core, whether it's Jacob Nonu and Zadrius Saleh who are starting, or Zadrius and X-Ray Alexander, or Jacob Manu and X-Ray, whatever that looks like. If it's 2 guys, if it's 3 guys, if you want to find ways to put 4 guys out there on the field at some time and run an old school 3-4 kind of defense, I feel like you have the personnel to make all that work. And this is another reason why I'm excited about Ryan Walters coming back and what he's going to be able to do, because this is something that we've talked about on the show, because he talked about it himself, saying, yeah, I had to change up what I normally like to run to fit the scheme of the guy and the players that I have in the room. And we saw that this season, and we saw it succeed. Now, you added Emmanuel Carnley on the back end with Dylan Robinson, who got so much experience as a true freshman. I think that that's a guy who's going to take a major step forward. Rashawn Clark is someone who really did shine whenever he was called upon in the nickel and when he did wind up winning that starting job. That's really great. This tandem of safeties in Ryland Lillard-Allen and Alex McLaughlin is going to be one of the best in the Big Ten, if not the very best. And then you throw in a true freshman who absolutely has the upside to come in and make some kind of impact right away in Gavin Day. Those 3 guys are going to be a really exciting rotation to watch. And again, you don't always want to have to rely on true freshmen, but it feels like, especially at safety, that's something that I trust Ryan Walters with completely. When you look at his time at Purdue and how he was able to help out Dylan Tiedemann, and you go back to Illinois and Missouri and some of the guys that he worked with there as well, I think that the way that this back 7 or back 6, if you will, depending on how many guys he wants to throw out there at any given time, I think that all of that is going to be just so important for how Washington's season goes, because we've seen the offense struggle in these big time games, but the defense kept you in it at any given point. The Ohio State game, the defense was tremendous. The Michigan game, it took until a short field for the defense to really break down at any given point. And then, of course, there were more turnovers after that, and it just kind of the wheels fell off. And in the Oregon game, you were one play away from having an opportunity to get the ball back and potentially go down and take the lead. Obviously, it didn't happen, but that's just how close some of these things were to taking a different turn this season. I don't want to talk about the Wisconsin game in that light because that offense was just abysmal. Even though it is important to note that it felt like that game was a really big turning point for the team defensively, especially after how they looked tremendous a couple weeks earlier against Illinois, but this defense just got better week in and week out as the season went along. And as things continue to take that step forward in Walter's second season, I think all of that is great. Now, that kind of brings us to not necessarily the elephant in the room, I would say, because I think that the struggles against big-time opponents would certainly take the cake in that regard. But Demond Williams is certainly not immune in that regard, where he struggled mightily against Oregon, against Michigan, at Wisconsin, against Ohio State. Those were his 4 worst games of the season, if you really want to just, be blunt about it. And that's one of those things where he does need to improve in that regard. And now that the world knows what he's making in NIL this upcoming season, the standard and the expectations around him are going to be higher, and rightfully so. And that's one of the reasons that On3 did put Washington in the top 25, because around the world of college football, Demond is going to be regarded as one of the, let's just call it 10 best quarterbacks in the sport for the 2026 season. You can think what you will about that, but that's what the expectation is going to be, especially after everything regarding his compensation and his brief transfer portal, disaster, whatever it is you want to call it. That's probably the best way to put it. I look at all of that, and he needs to rise up to the challenge of the season, because that is going to be the easiest way to right some of these wrongs, is to go out and just prove everybody wrong in every single way possible. And I think that he absolutely has the talent to do that. And there are going to be so many little things that it's going to come down to. It's who is he going to trust? Is he going to get better about not necessarily just protecting the football when it comes to sliding and protecting himself in that regard, but is he going to just be able to progress as a passer over the middle of the field? Is he going to be able to just progress in the right ways that we saw him take steps forward with in 2025, with not just necessarily all of those things, but now that there is no Denzel Boston to rely on, now that you are just coming into a much different situation where I don't want to say that you can get away with more things in 2025 because you were, a first year full-time starter as a true sophomore last season, but it's more so just there's going to be so much more attention paid to you because you look at some of these big games and how defenses wanted to key in on Jonah Coleman. It was something I remember some players saying after the Rutgers game in particular, where they mentioned that, for a couple of weeks now, it seems like the opposing defense's plan has been key in and stop Jonah Coleman in the rushing game and let everything else kind of happen from there. And Damon Williams benefited from that because it's very easy for him with that speed and that athleticism to make way, obviously with a 400-100 performance in that game. It certainly showed what kind of player he is and can be when everything is going right. But that's just not going to be the case this season because, again, you don't have one of the top projected running backs in the 2026 NFL draft. You don't have a first-round wide receiver right now who has emerged on this roster like Denzel Boston, both those guys being preseason All-Americans as well, obviously. So there is going to be so much more on the shoulders of Damon Williams this year. And with everything that has happened, there is no other choice but for him to rise up to the occasion. And I didn't want to mention the schedule off the top because I wanted to do it right here on the back end, where now that you can take a look forward and say, oh, okay, yeah, there are obviously going to be some very tough games. Indiana is coming to Husky Stadium. I was going to say, national champ or whatever, but I'm recording this before the game is over. So we don't know what that looks like just yet. You do. I don't. But you look at that. And then Penn State comes to town. Let's see what that roster looks like. You got to go to USC, to Oregon, to Nebraska. Those are going to be some very, very tough games. And I lay out those 5 because the absolute worst that Jedd Fisch can go in those games and still, have some hopes of making the college football playoff and taking that next step forward like he needs to in year 3 is the absolute worst you can do is 3-2. Because if you go 3-2 in those games, you got to win out the rest of the way. And you should be able to do that either way. That should be the expectation for the other 7 games on your schedule. But I look at where this team is right now and where this program could potentially be in 8-9 months if some of these guys do take that big step forward that you're looking for. And I do believe that there's a lot to be excited about in terms of the talent, in terms of where this coaching staff is going. And if we see that progression in spring camp, in fall camp, with a couple more additions to the transfer portal as well to potentially help out along the defensive line and maybe at wide receiver as well, I do believe that this ranking is going to be very, very well warranted. And by the time the season rolls around, who knows? Maybe Washington will even be a little bit higher than that. But that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. If you like what we have to offer here on Locked On Huskies, please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click the little bell so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.